Winter has finally arrived. Welcome back to IGN's weekly Game of Thrones show, Dragons on the Wall. I am Terry Schwartz. This is Eric Goldman, and we're here to talk about Dragonstone. We've waited so long for season 7 to premiere. Finally has full spoilers. Get out of here. Go watch it. What are you waiting for? And come back. Eric, this has my favorite opening to any Game of Thrones episode ever.
It's one hell of an opening. We'll talk later about, we got to go to the premiere. We were very lucky. Got to go to the premiere with the cast and crew, and to see that opening scene with an audience was great because what a crowd pleaser.
It's so rare to have a cold open on Game of Thrones, so it's special. And I was sort of hoping that this one would have a cold open, especially since it's been so long. How long did it take for you to figure out what was going on?
I mean, unless they were doing a flashback, because
what was happening with Walder and Arya? Did you pick up on it immediately?
Well, because don't forget, they showed the previously on, they reminded you she killed him.
Yeah.
So I think they wanted to make sure the audience wasn't vague on it. I mean, some people I still think will be thrown we saw him killed, what's going on? Is this a flashback? But assuming it wasn't a flashback, which was clear it wasn't very quickly, it's that's Arya. And it was great because we didn't think David Bradley would be back on this show.
Right.
Got to do one last scene, we assume, last scene.
And what the most perfectly fitting, you called it the Red Wedding 2 earlier, sort of joking.
Yeah.
But you have this, I was just cackling, I was just laughing at the audacity of the show to do this, to have Arya come back, beat Walder Frey, poison, get all the Freys together, give that speech, poison all of them. The Freys are freaking wiped
And it's got to be,
out.
It's Game of Thrones, so it wasn't a peaceful poisoning, it was a hacking up blood,
and
visceral
the
poisoning.
Revenge that we've been waiting 3 seasons for, 4 full seasons, and the North is returned. The North remembers. You didn't kill all the pack. It gives me chills thinking about it. What a perfect way to kick off this season.
It was great. I mean, I will say the one thing I find a little amusing whenever Arya is now in disguise is it's so Mission Impossible when she pulls off those perfect masks.
And I have a lot of questions about what goes on when you put on the mask, but she's as tall as him. Does she just walk out of his shoes and be short Arya again? Lots of questions.
Yeah.
We'll save that for a full season later, just extend the show.
When she pulls off those masks, I just want the Mission Impossible theme to play just once. But no, such a great opening. Like I said, the audience was literally cheering, myself included. Because it's again, it's interesting. We'll see where things go. It's Game of Thrones. I'm sure horrible things will happen to people we love. But we're coming out of a season that was, for Game of Thrones, much more uplifting and giving us heroes victories.
Sort of playing into fan service, doubling down on the things they know the fans want and like.
And so this was another one, Arya wiping out Walder Frey's entire awful family and assistants and everyone else. Pretty great moment, but now you just have to see, is the other shoe going to drop?
Yeah, I think it's definitely setting the precedent this season and going through to the end next year that big things are going to happen quickly. People are going to be wiped out, and that's going to be it, and we're going to move on, and there are other things to do. This is a show that kept growing bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger over the years, and now we're getting smaller and smaller and smaller and more focused.
Because it wasn't just taking out Walder Frey, who we saw die last year. It's now none of the House Frey can be called upon.
Yeah.
They're out of when people are building their armies,
And that's a good segue.
If it's a board game, you got to take them off.
That's a good segue. I do want to talk about Cersei Lannister and her new ally to be, Euron Greyjoy. Let's talk about, before we talk about how Euron has completely changed as a character between seasons, his gift that he promises her. I have a theory.
Yeah, you have a theory, and I think it's a very good theory.
So Euron promises Cersei that he will give her a special gift to prove his loyalty, something that she needs. To me, it's Gendry.
Mm-hmm.
We've been asking for seasons, when is Gendry coming back? Is he still rowing? Joe Dempsey was on the tip sheet for the carpet. He was at the premiere last night. So I'm I freaked out.
Yeah.
I know. I was okay, so Gendry's got to be coming back this year. People have been waiting. We're leaning into fan service. But the final Baratheon heir who could possibly claim the throne, that to me is the greatest gift and pledge for loyalty and pledge for I will find your enemies and destroy them that she could possibly want from him.
And I don't think bringing Gendry back is just fan service. There are characters that could just disappear and never come back because they're not that important. Gendry is important because of his bloodline, what he represents, and in a show that is literally about the Game of Thrones, who Gendry is important. And so they have to bring him back at some point.
I feel like it could be next episode.
And again, only 12 episodes of this series left at this point.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it could be the next episode. It could be very soon. But I do want to talk, what we were talking about Euron.
Swagger Pirate King.
Very entertaining scene. Very entertaining character who we've never met before. Yes, we met Euron last season, played by the same actor. But not only did he have a hip new look, but just acted completely different. I mean, it was basically them sort of, making fun of the depiction on the show of, that family prior to now, because he was pointing out, like, the Greyjoys, like, oh, that's just kind of like a dirty, nasty, ugly place you wouldn't want to be. But it was just funny because Euron did not act at all like he acted last season. But it was an improvement. You just had to kind of say, they reset this character.
They did a hard reset, and I think what's fun about him is he will be a villain this year, just like I would call Cersei a villain this year, but a very playful villain and a very playful premiere. I wonder if the show is going to remain this funny from here on out. It lost a lot of like the very like serious, sincere qualities of the earlier seasons, I think, and even like that Sam sequence in Old Town, it just was a lot more playful and fun, and this scene really embodied that to me.
Yeah, no, it was very, and it's funny because you think about playful villains on Game of Thrones. I suppose Ramsay was playful, but he was reprehensible.
Playful in a way that we're like, we don't want to play that game.
Yeah, whereas Euron, it's like, he has these quips. He has this line about, like, when she says, you killed your own brother, he's like, you should try it, it's really great.
He's like, what is going on?
So it does feel like maybe they feel like, Tyrion's kind of been the go-to for like, quippy stuff, but maybe they want a villain who can represent that, who isn't at a Joffrey or Ramsay level of horribleness. He's just a guy who's just like, I'm just here to gain some power, and I'm just here, like, he's like having fun with his villainy. Again, this is not the dude we met last year, but I thought it was a fun scene.
And I will say, it's been 6 years since the release of A Dance with Dragons, so we're very far past any book material right now, but I'm so curious to see how the depiction of Euron in the books will severely differ from the depiction on the show. I think they're two completely different characters at this point. They don't really have any source material to go on, but I don't think that this version of Euron, the more playful, like, I'm just here to cause chaos and wreak havoc, is going to match with the Euron who we know in the books. And hopefully for good reason. I don't think the books are as funny as the show is right now.
No.
This episode is called Dragonstone. We have to talk about the big arrival, the way that we end this episode, the perfect way to end it. Dany arrives in Westeros, and I love that final line of, like, let us begin. I almost wanted a bit more of a punch of her finally landing on Westerosi soil. I felt like they could have underlined that a lot more, just huge impact of something we've been waiting for 6-7 seasons
I agree. It's funny because I know some people will say, no, they made it important, and they did, but it felt
like music,
just
and like
something a little bigger, even though it was showing the gravitas to an extent, but it just felt, because of, like, we've waited since the very beginning of the show for her to reach Westeros, and we talked in the episode we did before, like, that she's got to get there this season, and hopefully right at the front, which they did. I think they had to get. The episode was called Dragonstone, so it would have been very strange if we didn't go to Dragonstone here. But yeah, I did almost want like a little more. But at the same time, it's like, the end of that episode and what they say, it's like, okay, this is it. Like, it's on. She's here.
And I do really like that experience of her walking back into Dragonstone, a setting that was really important, like season 2, but we haven't really been back to since. And seeing her walk through those halls, and I think they were smart to not really have any dialogue until the end, like having us remember, like Stannis being here, though I don't think we ever saw his throne, but like the painted table, we saw those in the flashbacks. And I think they did the same thing with the Hound story in this episode, where we go back to that setting with the farmer or whatever and his daughter, and we see that was very warm. Winter is here now. Think about how much time has passed. I think that was a really important thing that they underlined in this episode.
It's always funny when you get a Game of Thrones, which this one did, where the previously on is including stuff from years ago. They're like, oh yeah, they want to remind you that, like, you once saw Stannis at this castle. And you probably haven't thought about that in a while, but guess what? It's important again.
I loved the depictions of Westeros, though, between the painted table, which we've seen before, but also Cersei's map that she's had painted in King's Landing, which I love that map, that they released when the story started, and I'm glad that they've incorporated it into the show. But they're really doubling down on the idea that this is a Westeros set series from here on out. I don't think really any storylines will be taking place elsewhere unless like Dario.
It seems very difficult to, I guess, there could be tiny little tidbits, but I think, the story is now in Westeros, and what will happen with all these different factions coming together.
And we know the Night King is coming.
Yeah.
And what a great moment, I thought. Like, it was very obvious in retrospect, but when we go to Sam in Old Town and we get that double meaning of why this is called Dragonstone, because we learn we desperately need Valyrian steel. Oh, of course Dragonstone would be sitting on top of like a massive amounts of dragon class. I really like that we're now beginning to see how the pieces will come together, why people will be coming to Dany and need her help specifically. I thought that was really clever, a way to sort of bring those storylines together. What do you think?
Oh, no, yeah, definitely. I mean, because that, again, there really is such little time left, 12 episodes is not insignificant, but it's not a ton. So it is time to really show, how everyone is going to either right now see each other as a foe, but also like what other people have that they need, And Dany, of course, is this big X factor because she doesn't have any awareness of the White Walkers. Like, she's there to claim her throne, but guess what? There's this other thing happening, and how quickly can she be convinced of that? And to help and to, offer up what is around her.
I think that she'll end up having sort of the same conversations that Sansa and Jon are having up in Winterfell, where he's like, we need to focus on the White Walkers. And she's like, yeah, but Cersei will kill you.
Right.
We need to focus on the South. I think Dany obviously wants to come and claim Westeros, will want to go to King's Landing. Where else does she go first? And should she distract herself from that to save the country as we know it? And a really interesting line from Jim Broadbent's character, the Archmaester, where he was saying,
Professor Slughorn?
I know Professor Slughorn is back. I really liked his addition to the show, but his whole comment about how everyone thought it would be the end and the world survived. And is this really going to be the end, or will the world survive after the White Walkers come?
Right.
I think that's a really interesting question to sort of have hanging over this season. I do want to touch on the other very clever addition to the Old Town storyline, Jorah. Of course Jorah would go to Old Town to try and figure out how he could cure grayscale. It's such a aha moment, but I think it probably will surprise a lot of people that he is in that cell and there with Sam.
Yeah, we talked about how, Jorah, look, they couldn't just, yes, he's going to die by the end of the show, barring some miracle that I don't think is coming, but he's going to have some significance again. Mm-hmm. So, that makes perfect sense. And can he be, is he still fated to meet up one more time with Dany in all these conversations about what's happening? I mean, he is, of course, a person from Westeros, so it's like he would have more of a connection to that, more of an understanding about the wall and like what they say is beyond the wall. So that was a cool off-screen yet on-screen appearance.
His arm's looking pretty rough.
Arm is looking pretty rough, although Sam had to deal with even nastier stuff.
Oh my God, that sequence was so fun. We don't need to talk about that much more, but it was like very funny.
My wife was not happy with that sequence. When poop is involved.
They're like, John Bradley, you're gonna have more screen time. Here you clean up crap.
Yeah, here is the soup takes. Poop montage. Yeah.
That we've always been waiting for on Game of Thrones. Let's switch gears up to the north. Mm-hmm. Before I saw this episode, I spoke to Kit Harington about some of the comments he's made, just casually, just my pal, at the junket for Game of Thrones. And he had, I think, made us all nervous when he said there's going to be a big power struggle between Jon Snow and Sansa. And I was like, talk to me about this, because she's just annoying. She's just an irritant. And I think we see that Sansa. Here. I know. I then told that to Sophie at the premiere, and she was like, oh, that effing a-hole. Yeah. But I think we see a lot of that here, where she has been honed by the perfect political teachers. Yeah. He has been honed by the perfect battle leaders and honorable men. How do they mesh together? Not well so far.
Not well, but I like that it also wasn't like their rift this is it. I mean, they have that very tense moment where she said, no, we shouldn't do this. And he said, actually, I'm going to decree it is so. And then they talked afterwards, and it wasn't like I hate you now talk. It was actually like they had some sweet moments there, and they kind of tried to discuss how they're going to deal with this. I look, you know I'm Team Sansa. Not that I'm against Jon. I just I like Sansa as a character and her growth. And I liked that they had her directly verbalize what I was thinking, which is, okay, you know, is Jon going to follow the path of his father and his brother to a fault?
You have to be smarter.
And be the good, noble warrior in a world that is not good or noble. And then Sansa's like, hey, our dad and our brother were great guys, and guess what? They both got decapitated. And her pointing out that maybe you don't do what is right and noble, not in this world, not when I've seen some terrible, terrible things happen. So I felt like that they gave her due there as not being like, annoying Sansa wants what she wants. Her being like, look, I've seen what's happened when people try to fight the way you're fighting. And yes, it's like, it is nice that Jon's trying not to like, you know, take away an entire family's home because of what a couple people did. But at the same time, you know, you've got to see both sides of this. So I actually really liked, I thought they both were in the right in an interesting way there.
Yeah, I agree. And I really liked that line. It was almost a bit meta because I think we've all had those conversations off screen. Like, Ned and Robb, we love them, but they did deserve to die. There's a reason that they didn't last. Another thing, we were talking a little bit earlier about how this episode really emphasized how much time has passed. I thought what was so interesting is when you have that young Umber and Karstark, who are just children, sitting in front of Jon and Sansa, who were just children when this began.
Yeah.
I found that to be really impactful, to be like, this is the new generation who's going to save the world. And they are babies. And like, these were the babies who we've seen grow up and die and be raped and have horrible things happen to them, and now they need to save the world. And like, it really is the new generation rising up, and I'm like getting chills just thinking about it. Like it moves me a little bit. It really feels like the journey we've been on with these
And Lady
characters.
Mormont got her big moment
My
there.
God.
Yeah.
I'm stealing
another huge audience cheer moment, by the way, when she stood up and was like, I'm fighting. You know?
I'm stealing Joanna Robinson from Vanity Fair's words because we talked about it afterwards, but she's like, yeah, Jon really is the woke king of the North now. Like, girls can fight too.
Right.
But yeah, Lyanna saying, I don't need your permission to fight. Of course we're going to fight. Like, don't tell me I need to stay at home against White Walkers.
I will say the show, I think, is because definitely years have passed for the characters since the show began. And of course they had to, because the kids grew up, they kind of had to do that. But I will say the show has been a little wonky. Last season this began where we joked about people teleporting, you know, if they needed to get places really quickly. And I did think this premiere was a little shaky on how much time has passed since the finale, because for some characters it seemed like it was just a couple days later, but for some characters it seemed like a lot of time had
Baby
passed.
Sam is like toddler Sam.
Right,
you know?
right. And who knows, if someone made a chronology, maybe they could say, well, this Sam scene is taking place a couple months later than this. But it was funny because I was like, some scenes I'm like, is this shortly after the finale or a while later? And you kind of just have to go with it on a show with this many characters.
Exactly. Yeah. But I do think that they're doing a good job of showing how much winter is creeping south.
Yeah.
I really did like that scene with Beric and Thoros and the Hound, where we see R'hllor is like, anyone who's paying attention, get ye to the north. Like there's a big issue happening.
Issue happening, I like that.
There's something you
definitely
need to get there.
like an incident.
Please, like someone tell Dany. But you know, speaking of people going to the north, we have Jon and Sansa together.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's not going to take too long for Bran and Arya to get there shortly after. They definitely heavily set that up.
Yeah, a couple of years ago, like, you know, we had all those near misses, and Bran was the biggest near miss of all, of like people getting there after people left. And so on one hand, Bran gets to the wall, but Jon's not there anymore. A couple years ago, it would have been like, okay, again. But now it does feel like, okay, yeah, but he can probably figure out pretty quickly that his brother's actually back at his home. So, yeah, it feels like we are inching closer to like actual Stark family reunion, which is amazing. I mean, last year, again, we talked about Jon and Sansa never spoken to each other on the show, and what a huge deal was to have them together. And now it feels like, hey, maybe actually all four of them could
I
do
feel
this,
like Jon might skedaddle from Winterfell before they get
Yes,
there.
yes.
I feel like that's
But at
going to be
least
the near
Sansa
miss.
and him,
But Bran, it's really interesting. Also doing like the junkets and preseason interviews, talking to Isaac Hempstead Wright, who plays Bran, and he said the big shift you'll see this year is Bran isn't Bran anymore. He's not like, guys, I got all this knowledge. He's like, I am the sage three-eyed raven, and we see that when he's talking to everyone at the wall. And I think that will be sort of like the driving, more sage, wizened young Bran,
Right.
who we know will get to Winterfell. The Arya scene was so interesting, though, because we knew Ed Sheeran was going to be in this season. And he
Right.
starts singing, and we're all like, it's Ed Sheeran. And honestly, that got a lot of laughs that I don't think that they meant would be, like, get laughter during the
It was
premiere.
their most conspicuous celebrity cameo. I mean, the show has this thing where, like, a lot of, singers and people love Game of Thrones.
Mastodon were wildlings.
Right.
Yeah.
But a lot of times they're just kind of snuck in the background. And this was a very big, like, hey, we're going to have this famous singer sing with a big close-up on him.
Yeah.
And they're like, is that a new song? I mean, it was like, it was funny because it was almost like, yeah, it's my new hit single and it should have, like, now on iTunes.
The background for that cameo, too, is, like, Maisie Williams is a huge fan of Ed Sheeran,
Yeah.
and so they surprised her with it, and you can see how stoked she is in that scene. But I think, like, the reason why that scene went on for so long is she's like, I'm going to go kill the queen, and we know that's her goal. But then
Yeah.
they're all like, oh, but we miss our families. We want to go home. And you can see her head like being like, maybe I should
miss
go
my
home.
family.
Yeah. So I think that is the reason beyond Ed Sheeran cameoing and singing on Game of Thrones. That's
Right.
the reason that went on as long as it did.
I did think, like, the opening scene was so powerful that part of me is like, what if this was the closing scene and that's the only time we saw Arya in the premiere? Because honestly, it was even more impactful than Dany reaching Dragonstone.
I feel like they could have swapped
Maybe
them.
they could have swapped it, yeah. But
But that
Ed
opening
Sheeran needed
scene
to be
was
there,
so
you
good.
know?
Before we wrap up, it's humble braggy a little bit, but Eric and I did want to talk a little bit about what the premiere was like, because I know a lot of you are curious about that. This year was especially cool. I've been to every premiere since season 3. And
Oh, have you?
Oh, I have. I told you
Even
it'd be
the
a little
one
bit.
in England?
No, I did. It was LA, New York, San Francisco,
New York's-
LA,
okay.
LA.
New York's the one I didn't go to.
But this year, it was really cool. I don't know how many of you got to go to the Game of Thrones concert experience that traveled around the country, but Ramin, I can't pronounce his last name, the composer.
And I had a
on
great
the
talk
show,
with him at the premiere.
he led this like traveling Game of Thrones concert experience, and they ended at the premiere, and they held it at the Walt Disney Concert Hall, which is this really amazing music venue in LA, and performed like several sequences.
Yeah.
They performed the theme, Light of the Seven, and sort of like a medley of all the different, like the Lannister theme and the Stark theme and the Targaryen theme.
Yeah.
It was really cool.
It was awesome. It's funny. So I had just this past weekend gone to, at the Hollywood Bowl, they do this a lot of, which is like showing a movie with a live orchestra. And I went to Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, and that was so awesome too. And when I was talking to Ramin, I'm just going to use his first name because I'd massacre his last name. We're talking about how, because he said on the tour too, it's like, you're obviously going to get the uber fan at these things. So they go crazy, like cheering and booing. He said like they'd boo Ramsay. We didn't get a Ramsay clip really, except for one brief one. And it was the same at the Potter thing. And so it reminded me of that. It's just, you're watching these amazing scenes that were great scenes on the show anyway, but now you're seeing this live orchestra play and it's such good music. So I said to Trish, my wife, I was like, that was powerful. Like they're showing these scenes, of, Marjorie's death and these sort of big key moments from the show.
Yeah, they were playing it against sort of the sequences and the characters as they were performing.
And Dany, sailing on, heading to Westeros at the end of last season, and those were powerful moments in the context of the show. But here with the live orchestra, it was even more. And they were playing the scenes on the big screen behind it, so you felt it.
And I got to see the concert experience, and it truly was amazing. If they continue it, like I highly recommend going. I was sort of jaded going in, and then I watched it, and I was like, oh my God, like so much just happened. And the music is such a big part of Game of Thrones. But seeing Light of the Seven again in that setting with the live orchestra, that is the best thing the show has ever done to me. The most well executed, well directed, well acted. The special effects were incredible. It was tense. I was on the edge of my seat the whole time. I think that like 20, 30 minutes of the show is just it's so good. And so to see it again and to see it with the cast too, so many of those actors, like all those actors in that scene are now dead. Like and to know that the cast
Lena,
was there watching
and
it
she
too.
wasn't there. So,
That's true. Yeah. I guess that's true. But like Tom and Marjorie, Laura, the High Sparrow, Lanza, like that was, it was a really cool experience.
It was.
And then the party afterwards was themed, it very much was like winter has arrived and taken over everything.
He was like a big star of...
The Night King was everywhere. And
giant
they had,
Night King head.
Did you notice, there were stilt walkers, and a couple people made the cracks like, oh yes, the stilt walker is part of Game of Thrones lore. But they sort of were like stilt walker, like ice dragon inspired
Right.
things, which I know everyone is hoping. We saw the White Walker, the white versions of the giants, and we're like, is there going to be a white version of the dragons? But yeah, it's definitely like winter. Everything is winterized. They had all the costumes, but they were made out of paper, so they were white.
And they were all white.
Yeah, so I thought that was just a really neat sort of foreshadowing of what's to come.
Yeah, and they had that giant wall where they were projecting images that kept changing. So it was like the Night King, then it would change to just like burning city with dragon flying over it, and then it would have the main characters' faces. It was a lot of pomp and circumstance, but it all worked really well because this is a show that obviously has earned its epic stature at this point.
And to prove that not only terrible things happen on Game of Thrones, Kit Harington was there with Rose Leslie, his girlfriend of many years now, Ygritte, on the show.
And we should mention that they had him Kit Harington recorded an intro, just an audio intro beforehand, basically saying, don't leak any of the events of this premiere before it airs. But it was all like the Night's Watch, like he was like saying different stuff, and he ended it saying something about like, as you all know, and I do too, or something, and then her voice came on saying, "You know nothing, Jon Snow."
Yeah, and we all were like cheering.
Yeah, and I loved it
that.
because they're dating, they could just have her like, you can just record this quick thing.
Yeah, they were like, that's why she was at the hotel a day early to do it. So it was a really neat experience, a very exciting way to kick off a short, abridged season of Game of Thrones. But Dragons on the Wall will be back every week to give you your full conversation fix. We're going to be here theorizing and breaking down all the episodes. So please tune in back in every week, and then please also, if you enjoy our show, subscribe and give us a good rating on iTunes, and we'll appreciate it. There are plenty other shows on IGN, from Beyond to NBC to Game Scoop and to the newly resurrected IGN movie show, so please check into those. And if you want more Game of Thrones, we have 2 fun interviews that came out recently. We had Gwendolyn Christie, who plays Brienne, and Nikolai Coster-Waldau, who plays Jaime, interview each other, and it's just as adorable as you would hope. And also, I'm going to plug that Kit Harington interview where he was talking about why Sansa is an irritant this season, and I'm very intrigued to see how that
I disagree,
plays
Kit. Disagree.
So does she. And I think that'll about do it for us today, but we'll see you next week. We'll see you for all things Game of Thrones. Keep it here on IGN.
Dragons on the Wall.